Especially with a game like ours, planning a campaign can be a lot of fun, but I like planning the villain. It's time to take the stars to the earth on this episode of the Vanguard Chronicles. Hello and welcome everyone to yet another episode of the Vanguard Chronicles podcast, where we have an ongoing conversation into the creative process behind the Vanguard, our monthly crowdsourced D&D campaign of interconnected one-shots. I'm one of the hosts and also one of the dungeon masters of the Vanguard, Nathan. I also go by Spark Ascendant. And as always, I am joined by my co-host and one of the fellow DMs of the Vanguard, Sean, also known, of course, as General Grom. General, my guy, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Nathan?
Doing all right. These intros, they're fun. I'm liking it. I'm liking it. Getting the voices.
This is good. This was good.
Yeah.
One.
I didn't say podcast this time.
You didn't say podcast, yeah.
Because y'all don't let me live that one down.
It's a win.
Yeah, we take those, certainly. Well, I definitely want to go through as many niceties as we possibly can, but we should probably go as quick as we can because we have a lot to talk about this episode. So a couple things. So last time, for anyone who missed last episode, we talked about our second session of the Vanguard, the trials and tribulations we went through in running those, as unprepared as they were. So why in particular, we really want to get to talking to how once we had run those two sessions, we've now went from one shot to not just two one shots, but a campaign. And with a campaign, there certainly was a lot to plan. But before we dig into those details of exactly how we started to lay out the groundwork for this campaign moving forward, Sean, why don't you tell the folks about our charity?
Well, yeah, we started supporting a charity basically beginning of the year. It's called Extra Life. There's a QR on the screen. You should be able to see it. And there's also a link. It would be www.extra-life.org. And then search the Vanguard. You should be able to find us. It supports Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We run a 50-50 raffle at our event, as well as donations from the kind folks out there that are listening and are watching.
Certainly, and yes, we definitely appreciate any donations. So yeah, that's probably I think one of the coolest things about doing this is getting to help spread that too.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. I think so. It connects us to a community, our community to another community that really can use our help, so I think it's a good thing.
Cool. Well, speaking of making connections, in particular with our community, so Sean, we had 2 sessions in the tank.
Yep.
Rewind back in time, help catch me up because my memory is not nearly as good as I think I've proven now 5 deep. But yeah, so where were we at this point after having run our first 2?
As a guild, we had just established the houses. We started to present this idea, and to be able to another level of community, another level of connection to our community, as a launching point for other stories to be told. So that's where we were. Session 2 wrapped up. We had a good one in that we had a decent number of games being run, 4 games being run, and that was very valuable. And insight, we all kind of started to get hooked at that point.
Yep. At this point, I think after session 2, I went from being what was the joke we said, a DM contractor, to moving on to full time.
Yeah, you switched from the temp agency to fully brought on board. I just remember you saying it to me too. You looked at me like, "Yeah, I'm in."
Yeah, I actually say like that sounds like me. Yeah. Well, I mean, because. Again, for anyone who this is their first episode, like what was really cool too at that point was we had with people writing. We have a lot of our players. We encourage them to write summaries for our sessions that we've run, so that way we can get their recaps, and it serves to fill out the space and the world a little bit as they write what had occurred with them, and it further adds to the general sense of place, realism, purpose to what their characters are doing, as well as role play outside of the game. And I know that reading those summaries and seeing the people invested in the stories that we were creating, and I won't lie, the stories I was creating, like, I was very exciting. Like, that was super cool.
Yeah, it added a level of immersion to the players, so to give them real ground to flesh themselves out in, which I thought was great. And summarily for us as DMs, it gave us such an insight into our DMing what we're good at and what we may get better at, where our strengths and weaknesses lie. And I think that was so important for my development as a DM. And I know for those, you being a veteran, I think that absolutely propelled you into that another level. You know what I mean?
It really was a jumping off point, because I've said numerous times throughout us recording these that there were so many challenges, and there have been so many challenges with running the game from a DMing standpoint, because you have every session, right? It's a new one shot with an entirely different group of players. Don't know what to expect there. Variable levels. We know they're kind of similar in levels, but we don't know where it'll be. And then the challenges that we're addressing more in this issue, which is now, how do you connect them? Do you remember? I know, obviously I know where we went, but perchance, do you remember any of the ideas we were kicking around? I don't actually remember any of the ideas you were having at that point for how we were going to connect more.
We had started to discuss how this can grow, and we really didn't know. I mean, we were experimenting to a certain degree, and when it came to the guild dispatches and how they came back to us and how much we gained knowledge from it, at first that was a challenge. And every challenge, I think we approached a little bit the same way, which is continue the pace that we're going, be honest with our players, be honest with ourselves, put out what we can, show examples of what a guild dispatch could be, and continue with that. And then people started to catch on. But then we got the idea, why don't we give them something like inspiration or a potion? And that definitely launched that concept a little bit farther, I think.
Very much so. Absolutely, very much so did. Even more so, I think about how then as well, we got those, and one of the great tools I use with even my personal games and in getting those dispatches was we then had players, by seeing when you get your players to recap the games that you're running, as DMs, we get into that very my precious DM syndrome, where it's it's my precious, it's the story I wrote and I bled and I cried and I worked so hard for, and they ruined it in some way. But when you see actually after the story is over and you see the recap and you see the ways that what the players responded to in particular, and not just that, but what their characters responded to, it gives you such a cool platform to be able to design and develop and write more interesting stories that they'll engage with, because you have a guide right here, like your own little Bible of specifically what was appealing to them. And I think that was definitely the start for how we had how we start to approach planning moving forward. I know one big thing we talked about last session, everyone who was watching the YouTube got to see my reaction when you dropped the ledger.
Exactly. The ledger was a little nugget that, again, what made it funny or interesting to me is that the ledger was made up on the spot. It wasn't planned. It was part of the fact that I didn't have any notes. And as they got closer and as the adventure was playing out and I was giving them all the free reign they wanted, and I started to let that happen, I realized maybe I can find a little connecting dot for something later. And I just threw the nugget in. I just threw the ledger in as a thing, not really thinking it would be what it became. But just by its essence, it became so much of a launching point for other stories, and how a lot of this connected. And we're talking about the way this campaign evolved. Now that we had this idea of what was the joke we used to say? The players are playing one shots, the DMs are playing
and we're playing a campaign.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's kind of where that started. And as the players gave us dispatches, that's where the concept of a crowdsourced campaign was born.
Well, credit to you, because I think that ledger, so in case anyone missed last episode and isn't familiar, so the ledger was basically an item that your party found. It was a ledger that was in some way, I don't even think you really connected too much, but it was just a ledger that they recovered and took back to the guild. Right. It wasn't anything. And I think credit to you, as we have definitely seen with the ledger in particular, it was really a template for how we as DMs, in running this interconnected campaign of one shots, really were able to expand and still find that we were bringing stories together and leaving breadcrumbs for players to find that we're able to build much more organically while still not stepping on each other's toes or colliding in with conflicting ideas. Because the really cool thing is, so again, to reiterate, that ledger was just an item that was found. It was a single story thread. Yeah. So it was a single thing, a story thread that if it were left in a movie, you know, in the reviews of it, they'd say, oh, well, they left a bunch of story threads open. Oh yeah, there was this ledger thing, right?
Right.
But what it actually left is because you left it unopened, opened, it
Right.
was a tool that then I and other DMs, yourself included, were able to come back to and use as a story thread, jumping off piece, a touchstone, a MacGuffin, what have you, to then kick off another story of ours and to motivate another session. We'll probably talk about later. There were numerous sessions. I know I messaged you frequently and like every month, and I said, "Hey, Sean, what was that ledger again?" Because I was like, I can use this document in some way to help plan out another session that I had coming up. It really, I think yours was definitely like kind of the starting point for really these open threads, allowing for us to be much more flexible in our planning moving forward. That has carried to this point in the game.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think the ledger was such a vehicle from a story standpoint, and it was open ended on purpose. But the idea was that the ledger was taken from Whisper's Breath, which is a Fey Assassins Rogues Guild. So what was in it? What could they have in it? There were so many things that you could plot in it, and that Whisper's Breath was connected to the Monomaterial. That was kind of the original idea, was to use that as a connecting point that we would decipher that, oh, who is these? Well, I deciphered, remember, I took on, let me rephrase that. My characters, for once the ledger got into play and had to reuse it for a later adventure, they took it to Dorian Windrider, another NPC I created, and I'd left it with them so I could bring him back later with some answers. And those answers were after we discussed, you, Brian, Rich, and now as our other DMs got involved, that was like, okay, you have this ledger to work with, so use it.
And I think it's what's really interesting is we were little peek behind the curtains. So we were talking with our producer Ryan behind the scenes. Ryan will join the chat one day. And he brought up a really good point, I think, in illustrating how that style has really informed how we've been able to plan a lot of our games. It kind of what makes our campaign much more unique than standard ones you get at, like, say, another bar where it's just a bunch of contractor DMs coming and running. And no shade on that, right? Not insulting anyone's style there or any of those styles of games. They're great. Again, they are also kind of the more traditional style of one shot where you hop in and you hop out and kind of who cares.
Right.
But
you don't even bring your own characters.
Yeah, but part of how I think we were able to make this both able to do that, where you hop in, play a game, and if you don't come back, like, hey, it's cool, we're glad you play with you, or something you can invest so much emotion in, is when you look at a standard D&D campaign, your more traditional one, specifically how it is planned, you find that the actual flow of play in session, generally speaking, there's railroading, is much more loose, right? You have players hop in, the DM has some ideas of stuff that they want to do, but otherwise it's still up to the players to really guide where the narrative is going. The DM's kind of adjusting those like firm pillars of their campaign to ideally to fit where the players are going. And so in that sense, you can say like the planning of it is much more rigid, but the actual flow of play is much more loose in that sense. And with ours, partially because, again, we're also running a 3-hour time limit. That's another of those challenges that I mentioned, just because of the nature of the venue we work at. But our sessions are much more rigid. They're one shots. The example I give is, you're not going to go reclaim your last kingdom. You're not going to be Aquaman and take your kingdom back and your heritage back from your brother. You are on a one shot. We do, to a degree, railroad a little bit. We try our best to hide it, but there's kind of a known sense of like, hey, you're here for the adventure, do it. So it's much more rigid in that sense. But the actual planning of the tent poles of the campaign, even with some of the touchstones we have, which we'll talk about in a minute, are so much more loose. It's a ledger, it's a villain, it's a name, it's one antagonist, it's a transaction that occurred somewhere, it is a special weapon type that is being accrued on, and all of those are just left open. And then another DM comes to where we organize all of our stuff. We have a OneNote we use, says, ooh, this inspires me. Hey, so-and-so who came up with it, can I use it? And it really allows us to dance around each other while also interweaving. I think it's so cool.
It's one of my favorite parts is how naturally, first of all, it happened naturally. We didn't plan this out, say, this is your role, this is what you're supposed to do.
The wildest part.
Yeah, it was literally naturally fell into place with story writers that all like the game and all like the way we write. I think we wanted to give each of us enough room and breath, so the open-ended concept really helps, and then you allow the players to shape it. It's like we are presenting clay in terms of an environment, in terms of a playground, with things that are going to happen regardless of what the players do, and they have to react to the way the world is moving. If they do nothing, it'll have a consequence. If they do everything, it'll have a consequence. That's the idea. But their actions dictate how we shape the story. Not to the point where we're going to be like, oh, thank you for doing this. We're going to pull the rug out from under you. We want our players to be successful. That's not the point. It's letting them shape the story and allowing us. The term I'll use is put the rails down and put the train tracks down while the train is coming. That's what we're doing.
That might be very apt. But what I don't want anyone to get the impression of is that we have no sense of structure.
No, we are structured.
Yeah, and while we were planning this and having some of these early discussions, we did come up with a couple ideas. Just like before, they came from an email from me when I said, I don't know that it's possible. You would have to do. And then like a 5-paragraph email later, I present it to you. And then I think you forwarded it to all the other DMs. And I said, well, I guess we're doing this.
Yes, we are.
But so we introduced the concept of, I shouldn't say introduced, this is the blatantly stolen idea, and anyone who follows entertainment media will know what it's from. We introduced the idea to our campaign of phases.
Right.
Familiar?
Go ahead.
Yeah, anyone who's familiar with the MCU understands the concept of phases, and we jokingly call ourselves a DMCU, so I think this is pretty apropos. So let's quickly run through these, and then towards the end, we'll start to talk about ways we've incorporated. But so the general idea we came up with for just a loose story structure, a far cry from that first time we met, when you and I met in the bar, and we talked about, like, I don't know, we'll build to a raid. And so, okay, well, session 1, we'll all give them a key, and then realizing, oh, that's going to go way too quick.
Right.
We decided, let's start with where we were, which was we called it phase 1. And the key goal was to establish who we are, right? We're getting our base players. We're getting some regulars. We're just getting the flow of this interconnected campaign thing together. Establish the Vanguard, establish the Guild of Adventurers who are looking for magical items to keep them out of bad hands, and establish a weapon that they're trying to achieve. Our Infinity Gauntlets for this arc, whatever, called Neuraxis. That was phase 1.
Yeah.
Then we would move into phase 2, which was a couple false leads on Neuraxis, aka, I don't know if we actually did this one, but like one of the keys might be a fake, or you go to a location. Actually, one I had was with the Sunken Pyramid. You go to a location where you think a key is, there's no key there. It's a false lead. And also, part of why we might be getting false leads is, well, we need a central antagonist, which that's where the other part is. We capped off phase 2 by introducing our antagonists, which I'll tease that. We'll talk about the antagonists in just a couple minutes. So we establish them. So we have our big villains we're going to go against. And then phase 3, now we know who our villains are. We know what our goal is. We want to push to actually get ready to prep for the big climactic battle, fight, what have you. And then, of course, phase 4, which technically I think we're probably about mid phase 3 right now. So given that we still have an active game going, we won't give the details, but we still think it's going to be pretty epic. But we figured at least have this basic structure gave us a sense of how to plan each of our sessions. Hey, we're in phase 1, do sessions of this type. Hey, we're in phase 2, do sessions of this type. And critically, when to keep that flexibility open, the phases bleed into each other. Because if I have a brand new player on phase 2, they might not know who Neuraxis is. So we could just do a basic Vanguard quest that might have been a phase 1 in phase 2. Who cares, right? We have this level of flexibility throughout everything we're doing with the phases.
Yeah, the concept of it too was to allow us to write stories and give us a basic groundwork of how to write these stories. And honestly, in phase 3, we have just entered phase 3 that has just begun, because phase 2, we had moments in all of this that we decided were effective ways of transitioning from one phase to the other. It wasn't a time-based thing. It was a story-based thing. Where were we in all our stories? So as we, in phase 1, was repeating ourselves. The type of play, this is how we play. This is the stories you're going to see from the Vanguard. Go save the world. Be the heroes you're supposed to be. And it also filters players out as we start to realize who wants to be the murder hobos and who wants to be the the true adventurer.
Mushrooms.
Right, who wants to do mushrooms. And so that was also kind of the give and take of phase one. And we knew at the end of phase one, as we were writing it, as we were getting guild dispatches from the characters, that's when Nathan and I kind of said, all right, the end of phase one is when we will find out who our enemy is. And it's the first taste, and I will say this because I remember it very well. It was one of my favorite nights. The first taste of what collective gameplay in this environment could be like. Because Nathan got to do the speech from the Hag. Because we introduced the idea that the Hag cast a dreamscape over everyone in the guild. Everyone that was still an active member of the guild at the time were still being there. Everyone and Nathan performed it beautifully in front of everybody. And I was in the back. And I'm watching this go down. And the attention to detail, how every player was glued to you and watching how you did that performance, it is exactly the moment when I realized we have not only a great DM, but we also have this idea is going to work. People are going to buy into it. People are going to understand what we're doing. And the idea that now everybody is a part of one thing, one event. And that was the end of phase one. Phase two was now establish how bad they are. Let's show it. Let's show what the monomaterial is and give them a personality.
You dropped it. You dropped the name.
Right, but the name's already out because it was the end of phase one.
I hadn't introduced you to the podcast yet, my guy. Well,
we said it last podcast. I know.
Oh, we did? Oh, never mind.
I'm sure we did.
It's all right.
Check the recordings.
Yeah, it's fine.
I know we said it at some point.
That's all right. You're excited as I am. It's absolutely okay. I was trying to do the workup. So yeah, let's dive in then to the monomaterial specifically.
Oh, okay. Yes. Our antagonist, because that was the point of phase one, was to establish that there was an antagonist, but we didn't know who they were. Right. Then establish how bad they are and what they're after is what we're after. And then all the little intertwining conflict where it would end with that phase ended with everyone knowing where Neuraxis is, and
precisely
which we'll get to. But my point is that's how those phases ended. Phase three is now beginning as we now start telling adventures and stories within to level our characters up, to give people more to do, show a little bit more of what the monomaterial is trying to do. They're gaining resources, we're gaining resources. The struggle gets real. Is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, it definitely does. So yeah, we'll also touch briefly on the monomaterial then. So that was the other piece, because we had our structure. We had to have a good antagonist, and this was the other place where Nathan went a little crazy. So we'll probably do an entire episode on the monomaterial, so I don't want to give the entire ghost away. But the idea we came up with them, because I thought it was a cool area to dig into and get some really deep and rich stories, was I looked at what we had done so far, and I knew that our key thing we were looking for was Neuraxis.
Right.
I also knew it was Neuraxis, the mage killer, some kind of glaive or staff, very powerful for defeating mages. And I also considered as well, players are going to play, D&D players in particular are going to, and for us to have a good central antagonist, it wasn't enough to have just one person, because as I may or may not have almost experienced in one of our one-shots, if you put an antagonist that players don't like in front of them, they will attempt to kill it.
Yep.
And if if Thanos dies at my table, I don't want to be the one who jumps in the DM Discord and says, "Hey guys, sorry I let Thanos die." I don't want that to happen.
Right.
And it becomes a lot easier when you have an organization, because then also it gives, once again, back to those open threads and that flexible space for DMs. You can tell so many more stories when you have a large, widespread organization, because in the same way that the Vanguard is split into its guilds, especially a criminal organization or an evil organization is split itself into sub-factions, all vying and competing with different ideologies in many different ways. So I just thought it was a really rich idea. And the idea of the monomaterial being they hate magic.
Yep. They despise it. They want to return the world to a natural order, and reducing magic to to nothing is what they're trying to do. I do believe when you came up with the basis of the Monomaterial, you're right. It was written. It has such an open-ended variety. They're faceless. For a long time, they were nameless. So the nameless, faceless kind of antagonists, you can just keep building up and keep building up, and it makes people, they really want to take them on. And so it just adds such a level of depth to your enemy and to your villain. A lot of times, what the players are thinking is way worse than what you've planned.
In this case, I'd say not, but yes.
Exactly. I think they don't know what they've got coming, but we do, and I think that's great. But also, it was, as storytellers and as a DM myself, I love the concept of a organization almost on their side. They think what they're doing is right.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, and the idea that they spread across Faerun, collecting recruits and indoctrinating by showing people a better life and getting them on their side.
Yeah. So specifically with their main doctrine, that's the whole Monomaterial. The slogan we came up with was they want to take the stars to the earth. Right. They want to get rid of all magic, all kind. That includes all spellcasters. They do use a caste of spellcasters. We call them the penitent, which are basically, I'll call them indentured, but not so indentured. Servants to them. Some cases willingly repentant, in other cases unwillingly repentant mages, druids, spellcasters, sorcerers, clerics, anyone who's casted a magical spell who has, again, willingly or not, been brought into service to basically dirty themselves with magic. So the purer, clean, I've never touched this awful, evil, arcane substance ever. Right. They can keep their hands clean and be righteous in their beliefs. I thought they were really right for storytelling because it brought a core theming that was really cool, right? A lot of ideas for, you get a lot more bruiser and more might makes right mentalities out of it. Mm-hmm. I also thought just such a philosophy of wanting to purge magic is so interesting depending on who you talk to about it. I can see certain individuals might think, oh, we just hate wizards, so I don't like wizards, we'll get rid of wizards, not realizing that, like, yeah, but that includes all your cool magical items you like. Right. I can see a dragon thinking like, oh yeah, we'll get rid of the pesky wizards or spellcasters that, make me fall out of the air. Right. Well, dragon, you're magical too. Like, glad to have your help, but at the end of the day, we're going to turn on you.
Right. They're coming for you. And that mentality, it was a great challenge from the beginning. Once you brought forth this antagonist, for the rest of us to try to buy into what made them bad and start to discuss how do you make a bad guy, or how do you develop a bad guy who doesn't use magic? It's a challenge. It really was.
It's become more of a challenge as we've gone too. For anyone who is listening to any of this and thinking like, honestly, this feels conceited to me. If they're thinking like, oh, that's really cool, that's a great idea, or if you're not thinking it, regardless. There are definitely challenges, and I think the Monomaterials also has been a really cool challenge for us because, yeah, precisely, we realized way too late in the process that when you have a main antagonist that does not use magic, or rather, the higher up in the hierarchy you go, the less magic is tolerated. Suddenly, you need to find really creative ways to tell stories that also scale up with your players. One of the best ideas we had, and I dropped it to our producer and one of our DMs, Ryan, and he ran with it, was I said, well, I'm like scrolling through the monster manual as I do, and I'm just going to give a real poke behind the screen. In our little private chat, he just messaged, yeah, so he's very excited about this too. But I said, well, we're in Faerun. Take him to Chult, because I think a lot of shipments have been coming in from Chult, and they might have some very particular eggs. And anyone who knows anything about Forgotten Realms lore, they're not dragons in those eggs, but they're pretty darn close. They walk on two legs, and they got really tiny arms. Dinosaurs make for really cool, really big, enemies that scale to player level and are incredibly deadly and feel epic, but again, get rid of that magical sense.
Controlling beasts, being able to control weapons of war that aren't necessarily magic, and that's some of it is indoctrination, and some of it is the way they manipulate their cultures as they overtake them into believing in what they're doing is right and purging the wizards from within their ranks and becoming a bit of a in their mind, a more pure society. And it's not necessarily true, but that's their doctrine, that's their belief. And you're right, the higher you go up the chain, the less magic is tolerated. And they want it done. They don't care how it gets done, but they want to keep their hands as clean as possible because that's what they believe.
And as a villain, they've really allowed us to introduce a lot of really cool NPCs. Some of them allies, some of them very much not. We keep bringing up the hags, for example. So, brief story, the way the hags came in was, here's that ledger again, was okay. I designed a quest in which on the ledger was a list of names. Those names were deemed to be magical figures, and one of them was deemed to be local. What I came up with was that list of names were assassination targets.
Right.
So I had players that went to investigate one of these individuals, discovered an assassination plot, and it was a coven of hags had been set to kill a forest spirit. Mm-hmm. They had already killed the forest spirit. Short version of it, though, the players discovered that the Monomaterial had played the hags and told them, hey, kill this forest spirit for me, because I'm on your side. And then they manipulated us into going to kill the hags to clean their tracks, because we just saw these hags killed a good forest spirit. Oh my God. But really it was the Monomaterial playing both sides.
Right.
And then, so as a result, it allowed the hags to then want to form a very tenuous alliance and reveal to the players who the villain is, who hired us and hired you to kill us, who's behind it, which then I didn't realize our first multi-table gameplay session allowed me to dig into like some old high school poetry stuff and write this like rhyming speech as delivered through a dream, and this vision for the dread Dwedgewella to deliver to all of our players all at once at the end of the night. And I'm watching as she mentions, take the stars to the earth, as a couple of our players are mouthing it out. I watched you mouth the word Monomaterial is their name as part of the lines. For anyone who's curious to read it, please take a look again. We have a wiki where all of the misses are, where our summaries are. I believe it's vanguardguild.fandom.com is the address you need. Please, if you want to read it, check it out, dig through. There's so much lore if you're curious about how we've told any of these stories. But that's just one of my personal favorite examples of how we've used them. What are some of the other cool ones you've used, or even just some of the allies? Because you had the Whisper's Breath, which I know were some of the allies of the Monomaterial.
Yeah, the Whisper's Breath was a Fey Assassins Guild that worked itself. Obviously, they are for contract and for hire, and a Monomaterial felt them necessary and used them to attempt to retrieve the Crown of Reversal. They retrieved it, but the party was able to retrieve it back, as well as the ledger. The Whisper's Breath was a good one. Then there's the Crimson Syndicate, which is like a thug gang of just brutal. It was originally, I want to say, was run by Thrax Grimjaw, half giant barbarian, but he was, in my last adventure, the last one we just played, was eliminated by a new player. It was great.
Nice, sweet.
And was at a conclusion of an arc. So the Crimson Syndicate came into play as an arc telling, became the Patsy of the story, is how I lined them up. That's how I wanted them to be. So they were intended to you were the ones who killed Ash Vale, and you killed him. No, we all know that didn't happen. We know. Our players didn't find out until after the fact that it wasn't them. And
I had my joy, Baron Algaron, who the hag kind of took priority. He'll, spoiler alert for some of our players, he'll be coming back in the fold a little bit more, but I came up with the idea. I said, I love the idea of with such a large organization, and knowing after the Keys incident that we needed space for the players to grow. I like the idea of having a front that's just hateable, but he's not actually a front. So I came up with Baron Algaron, who is just a rich silver mine owner. That's it. He owns a bunch of silver mines, has a lot of money, has a lot of wealth, and thinks he can buy his way out of everything because he's done well in business, because he's done well in trade, because he's just been so accomplished with his inherited wealth from his name is Algaron Hojarath. It's Hojarath Holdings. Thinks that he can outplay the adventurers, openly puts himself in harm's way, because if he dies, who cares? But also left me in more threads as I with him, the mines he owns are silver mines, because I took inspiration from the fact that silvered weapons, correct me if I'm wrong, ignore magical resistance. So for anyone who's newer to the game and does not know the rules, there are certain creatures, dragons are a case in point, ghosts are another good one, I think, where if you attack with a weapon that is non-magical, they have resistance to the attack, whether if it's one of the normal damage types, piercing, slashing, bludgeoning.
Right, it's resistance.
But if you use a magical, it'll say oftentimes, except for non-magical weapons. Right. Silvered weapons get past that. So I thought, how would this dude get in the good graces of the Monomaterial? Oh, he owns silver and is bankrolling them as an arms dealer. And again, as a result, he feels high and mighty, like he's one of the big leagues, when really, he's not. And I'll say point blank, they'll throw him away in a heartbeat the moment he does something they don't like. Because they're more trained, more capable, and they'll kill him straight up. They will absolutely. And he's a character who doesn't know that, and he's allowed me a lot of fun with some of the stories that I've designed and some stories I have planning down the road, however far that may be.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I agree. I think each one of when we create an antagonist, when we create a sub-antagonist, as I like to say, the helpers, you need them. And I think when we create them, we want to breathe life into them, but we also want to have them have a limited existence. They're not going to be around forever. That was the whole point. Make them like them, make them hate them, whatever. But with good and bad NPCs, I always like to, if you're going to show them the consequences of the game, a lot of times players think they can't get hurt. They're never going to die. There's always somebody with a healing potion. There's always somebody
never going to die.
Never going to die. They're always going to make it to level 20. Everybody does. So to kind of show some reality to them and at least get them thinking that it could happen, you kill off an NPC that they like, but you have to make them like them first. So the whole point is to get them involved in that character's arc and that NPC's life a bit, and that they need each other. There's a little bit of back and forth, but they actually like that person. And then once they like them and that person's helped them a few times, having them die in front of them or have them face some peril, extreme peril, and then eventually die, shows the characters that can happen.
While we're on it, Sean, did you want to announce the next character that we're planning on killing off in the campaign? Just do it here.
No, because I'm not quite sure who that might be.
Depending on our release schedule, it just may occur beforehand. You can set yourself a timer.
Yeah, it could happen. I don't know. I do think it's funny that in some of our, within our Discord and within the Facebook group, which is, I love how that's become such a high traffic area for conversation. I think it's great.
It's awesome.
Somebody has actually put out that General Grom wants to kill someone. I'm like, I do not. I will put it on record. General Grom does not want to kill anyone. He wants to get really close.
Which is so hilarious because I'm the one, I think, of the DMs who jokes the most in our Discord about how I'm going to cause a TPK this time. It's my main bragging point. and actually, funny thing, mentioning the Discord too. So I know one question that came in was where the idea for the Monomaterial name came from. Sean, are you aware of how I came up with the idea?
No, I have no idea. I asked you, and you said Monomaterial, and I said that was a great name, so I ran with it.
Yeah, well, actually, it's twofold. It's I liked alliteration, but the other piece too was I liked the idea of unifying as one and bring it all to one. So the infinite stars, that idea of bring the stars to the earth, the infinite spectrum of all possibilities that comes from magical use, because you have divine magic and nature magic and arcane magic and bard magic. If you're a warlock, I guess it's technically arcane, depending on where you're getting it from. You have all these schools, all of the life form things, everything, and all of it just being erased and brought down to just a single natural order way of the world, just a one single mono,
right?
And then material being, I thought, like, again, take the stars to the earth. What is physical? What is tangible? The material. So one material, the mono material was the idea that came out.
That's fantastic. I did not know that. That's dude, some knowledge I just got. Awesome.
They really wrote themselves. I was gonna say, I think it seems to me like so far all the DMs have liked playing with them. I'm always curious. What's one of the sessions you've liked running?
Well, actually, the Obsidian Caldera was one of my favorites, where I got to use the Monomaterial in a slightly different way. And what I found interesting is I allowed my players they met with Dorian Windrider, who had told them about some information that he found in the ledger. to point back to the ledger, that the obsidian caldera, which held the pyroforge, was the monomaterial was trying to restart it and use it for it whatever nefarious means they could gain from its power. So the adventurers were going to go out there and see what was going on. As they were traveling out there, they ran into a child, and it took them a bit because I didn't quite reveal it.
This.
But the child was unwillingly brought into the monomaterial. And this was also one of those experiences of interconnected gameplay, because I believe some characters that were in that game with me had played at your table where the monomaterial was quite nasty to them and did some things they were really understood how bad they were.
And if I'm correct, yes, it would have been after the meeting with Baron Algaron, in which a penitent blew himself up.
Right.
Because again, frequently the monomaterial would use penitent as self fireballs, because again, the idea is they are dirty, they are unclean, they have used magic, they have tainted themselves, they do not deserve a space in the natural world order, so use them because they're powerful to achieve our goals, and then when we're done we will get rid of them. So yes, that specifically all magic used in the monomaterial are a penitent, which I think will matter for where you're going next.
So when they realized who this kid was, and that he was there because he was on a science trip with his monomaterial friends trying to restart the Pyroforge. They messed up. It exploded, released Cindermaw, which is a direwolf-shaped fire elemental that is now roaming the area, and this kid was the only one who survived. Though I found out eventually, like the next morning, they found out that the kid could use magic. And at that moment, the entire party was like, uh-oh, we got to save this kid. We can't let him go back. We can't let him go back to the monomaterial. They're eventually going to use him and then kill him. And they were very adamant about it. So what I ended up doing in the end, when they all faced off against Cindermaw, the monomaterial has sent a scout force to find out what happened to their science trip. And in that group, the child's father was a part of it. So now there's this whole, this whole little background thing where the father sees the kid use magic in the fight, and is now his eyes because he's also, the father is just a new indoctrinate. He's not, he's new to it. So he's like, I don't really buy into this. They just had more food. They just had more food. So I stayed with them. And now, and he was also grief stricken because his wife had passed, and a magic user, a cleric, couldn't save him, his wife. So he was very I hate magic should be. He bought into their indoctrination very easily, and the son came along with it. So what has happened, and we haven't really played it out, I'm going to bring this kid back. I might even do it soon, is that the father made a deal with the Vanguard to take the son, train him, protect him, and he will find his way back to him, because if they just try to escape, the monomaterial would hunt them down. And he knew that if they separated and the son was safe, he could find his way out later. And I'm going to bring that back. I haven't brought that arc back yet. That thread is still unfinished.
I think what started is just this simple idea of doing the whole idea of doing the interconnected one-shots, to then the idea of these phases, and then particularly doing an organization villain, and the monomaterial being the one we went with. Honestly, I hope anyone listening is able to pick up the amount of excitement we have had telling some of these stories, but also I hope in some ways it kind of inspires several people to see if they're looking at running their own Vanguard style campaign, be it at a bar or an LGS or I don't know, a work thing. Like, this is where things start to open up. And at this point in our telling of the tales of the Vanguard, I think we've really begun to show where you can go with this campaign style and why it is so cool. But
I think that this is the point where we started to see threads interweave without explicitly saying, I'm doing this, you have to do that. Right. I want this, you have to accomplish that. None of that has ever happened. It is just we've become very adept at leaving little trails, not only for our players, but for our other DMs, and be willing to come back and say, hey, I added this from something I read that you did. on the wiki page or our OneNote. I would prefer the wiki page,
Right.
Because I enjoy reading it.
Mhm.
And that would be vanguardguild.fandom.com. Make sure I get that in. I don't ever get to say it, so
Very nice. Yeah, I'm definitely starting to memorize it. But
yeah.
yeah,
so
but
that the wiki is like, for me, was a great place to go and pick up nuggets and pick up little tidbits, not only from my own adventures, but also from everyone else's. And that's where those threads come in. You don't realize how unique that becomes when a player who played in Nathan's game or a player that played in Brian's game
oh my
comes
God,
to my
yes.
table and I extend a piece of something that happened. Oh, I remember that. Yeah, because he's now here and you have to deal with it.
Or
And
you see the eyes widen as they realize, oh, that's where that's from.
right. And that's why I needed to get that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It didn't seem important at the time. That's the other thing I do like, is that a lot of our stuff may not seem important at the time, but indirectly it all is. Simply because we will take that, what may seem unimportant to the players, and run with it and make it important because it's a nugget.
Definitely is. Well, clearly you and I can keep going, but I think that might actually be all the time we have for this episode, and I think it really is a great note to end on. But if anyone wants to hear more, next time on the Vanguard Chronicles is going to be a really special episode. We're going to dive into one particular game from our third session and talk about one particular table from that session. It was one of our early games that had so many significant and human moments that we really wanted to dedicate an entire episode to it. To us, it 100% is... It definitely sent ripples throughout the entire Vanguard campaign, and it still affects and motivates certainly myself, you, and all our DMs and all of our players still to this day. And of course, we're going to have our first guest on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. Yeah, that particular session launched, I use the term, it launched 1,000 stories. It launched 1,000 ideas from all of us. It inspired all of us and connected all of us. So yeah, I'm excited about that one too.
But that'll be next time. Thank you all again for listening to the Vanguard Chronicles podcast. If you want to read more about our adventures, don't forget to check out our wiki at vanguardguild.fandom.com. If you want to support our charity with Extra Life, go to their website and search for the Vanguard. And of course, if you want to support us, you already know the drill. Please like, please subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.